So what we're going to talk about today is asbestos surveys. We're going to have a little workshop and we're going to cut it into 3 sections. So who am I, for those of you that don't know me? I do know a few friendly faces in the crowd. I'm Craig Newsom, I'm the Asbestos Technical Manager at Tri-X. I'm a qualified asbestos surveyor and asbestos manager. I'm a licensed asbestos assessor through WorkSafe, and I'm a British Occupational Hygiene Society course tutor for asbestos qualifications. So the workshop content, we're briefly going to expand on what Nick was talking about asbestos legislation, refurbishment and demolition surveys and the duty to identify. We're going to have a practical exercise on asbestos in buildings. So you've got a little piece of paper in front of you, and we're going to ask you shortly to try and identify what is in the corresponding box. And then we're going to touch on asbestos surveys, the different types of survey available, what you should be looking for in your survey report, and the purpose of the survey that you engage to be undertaken. So to start with, all of this is covered by the Health and Safety at Work Asbestos Regulations 2016. One of the main differences with the new regulations is it now also recognises and names all 6 regulated types of asbestos as opposed to the 3 most common. And it now defines work with asbestos, which is really, really good. So the big question is, what is work with asbestos? And I'm going to actually ask the crowd as part of the interactiveness. And I'm going to go with, who do I recognise? Let's go with Jay. Jay, what is work with asbestos?
Any work that might involve going near it or touching it.
Exactly. Absolutely perfect. Spot on. It's commonly thought that work with asbestos is people such as surveyors, analysts, people conducting air monitoring, asbestos removers and so forth. Work with asbestos, if it's on the next slide, yep, in effect is now anybody who may advertently or inadvertently disturb the asbestos as part of their normal occupational activities. So this is anybody from electricians, plumbers, carpenters, solar panel installers, roofers, even down to painters and decorators. If you could potentially disturb it either by drilling, brazing it, falling over with your ladders and actually going through a cement sheet wall, something like that, that is now defined as work with asbestos. So there's a list of common occupations up there. Like we said, even telephone installers, surveyors, geotech engineers with asbestos in soil, things like that. So there's a couple of regulations that apply to work with asbestos, and there's a specific regulation on the PCBU to identify all asbestos in the workplace. So for argument's sake, an electrician or a plumber may be going into whether it's a residential dwelling or maybe in their offices, in their warehouse. That becomes the workplace. The moment the plumber or the electrician enters that site, that becomes their workplace and they also become a PCBU. So now there is a duty under Regulation 10 to identify it in the premises. And also, if you work with asbestos, there's now a regulation which places a duty to train your workers about asbestos. So to train workers in the identification, safe handling and control measures, emergency procedures, things like that. So what does that mean, training? Realistically, asbestos awareness training. There's a number of providers across New Zealand do asbestos awareness training. It can take the form of a formal class, it can take the form of in-house training, it can also take the form of supervision with workers that are trained in asbestos awareness. We're thinking about going into the workplace. We're an electrician, it's minor refurbishments, we need to identify it in the workplace. If an electrician is going to be working on a fuse board that may contain asbestos, it either needs to be presumed to contain asbestos or a sample needs to be taken to identify whether or not the material is asbestos. Now, this is all okay for the workplace, for general maintenance activities. When it comes to demolition of properties, which a lot of this is going on in Christchurch, and refurbishment of properties post-earthquake, there are 4 regulations that apply to these, and these are certainly much more, what's the word I'm looking for, much more essential to have done, certainly prior to these getting done. So regulations 22 and 23, these apply to structures and homes prior to demolition. There's an implicit duty to identify all asbestos within the fabric of the building prior, and this is key, prior to the demolition. Not halfway through the demolition is what happens a lot of the times, not after the demolition. It must be done before anybody goes in there to start the demolition work so it can be removed. And this is very, very similar for refurbishment of buildings. If you're going to refurbish a building, even if it's just a specific area of a building, Regulation 25 and 26 cover this. Again, asbestos must be identified prior. Had a few occasions before, you get a phone call from a client or from somebody that's doing a refurbishment. Oh, can you come out and test the asbestos? Yep, not a problem. You get there, you find the work has already been undertaken. The asbestos has been disturbed. This is why they're having a test. The downside to this is that means somebody in the workplace has been exposed to asbestos in order for them to suddenly decide, yes, we need this asbestos testing. It's not something you really want to happen to yourself. It's not something that you want to happen to your workers. There we go. And this is the reason. It's a typical picture here of a recent demolition. This is when we were called to conduct an asbestos survey. We got there, we found the digger had already gone through the house. It transpires there was no survey undertaken at this property at all. The digger driver was told that there was an asbestos survey on this property. He thought, yep, fair enough, no problem. Being told there's no asbestos there, put his digger through it. He had done an asbestos awareness course and he thought, you know what, something's not quite right here. All this cladding looks like asbestos. Sure enough, all the cladding down the side of the building, the soffits, there were vinyls inside, there was textured coatings or stipple inside the building. Because of the spread of the asbestos, this turned into a contaminated site, had to have lots and lots of soil testing. Surveys are relatively cheap, they range from $500 to about $3,000, depending on the size of the building and the type of survey that's going to be undertaken. It's not cost effective to not have a survey. A clean-up like this, when a digger goes through it, is in the tens of thousands. I think this one was about 35,000 by the time it was done. Asbestos in buildings. We're going to have a little practical exercise on this. Everybody got a pen? Good. Can use crayons if you want. So, as Nick said earlier, if you're working on a building built prior to the year 2000, it is more likely to contain asbestos than something post-2000. And I will stress, the year 2000 cut-off doesn't mean that a building is asbestos-free. It only means it is less likely to contain asbestos. Asbestos in New Zealand, the importation of it in non-raw form wasn't banned until October last year. There are a lot of countries across, certainly Southeast Asia, China, places like that, which import lots and lots of materials into New Zealand. There is no ban on asbestos use in China. The latest figures from China indicate they produce and manufacture with 565,000 tonnes of asbestos per year. So that's a lot of asbestos that could still be coming into New Zealand, which is marked as asbestos-free. So, we're going to have the little practical exercise now. We're going to have about 3 minutes. I see some are already at it. So, on the picture in front of you, you've got a picture of a house, and there are 10 boxes spread all across the building. To the left of the page, there are another 10 boxes with correlating numbers to the boxes on the building. There are some potential asbestos-containing materials in them pictures. Could you have a go at listing what the asbestos you think is in that picture, and then we'll ask 2 or 3 tables at the end what they've got in the boxes. So we're now at 5:30, if we say 5 minutes. Everybody done? Everybody ready? Everybody cheated? No? Good. So, fast. No, we'll go back. We won't cheat. So, we'll ask a table to identify what is in box 1. And who are we going to go for? I think I'm going to go with the table where Henry is sat at the back. Go on, Henry. What's in box 1? Spread coating. Let's have a look. Yep, spread coating to the beam. We've got insulation board ceiling tiles. So these are just common things that can be found in buildings, but these are actually what is in this picture. And we've got, everybody recognises it, Super 6 roofing on the roof. Everybody get that? Good. Let's go with, I do want to pick on somebody over there, but he's eating. Let's go with Gordon. What's in picture 2? So the brake shoe in a lift motor room, probably lots and lots of asbestos contaminated dust off that brake shoe. So if there's any lift engineers in here, bear that in mind when you're going into these motor rooms. Insulation board fireproofing to the actual lift shaft itself. I don't know if anybody's seen the cladding going down the shaft. And to the external of the lift motor room, there is external cladding. Pretty typical on many houses in New Zealand, asbestos cement, fibre cement or insulation board cladding to the outside. I won't pick on anybody else for the next one. So picture 3, there's lots and lots in that. Stipple to the ceiling, to the underside of it. Loose fill insulation. Asbestos cement water tank. And asbestos cement roof tiles which are made to look like slate. Seen somebody recognise this building here. So in picture 4, many houses in New Zealand, stucco. So the texture coating to the outside of the building. Super 6 roofing again. Bitumen lined drain. So how many people have seen the metal guttering on the outside of properties, certainly in commercial properties, and they're actually lined with bitumen to stop them leaking? Well, the bitumen itself can typically contain about 8% chrysotile asbestos. We've got the insulation board soffit, comes on many houses in New Zealand, and again, asbestos cement cladding to the external of the property. Picture 6, this might be of particular interest to any electricians who are in the room. Typically, the fuse board backing, the black fuse board backings typically contain asbestos. Pretty obvious one that everybody knows. Commonly, a lot of these that we come across either have a backing behind that of cement or the fuse box itself actually lined with either cement, insulation board, mill board, and in one particularly rare circumstance, actually asbestos cardboard we came across in one of these, so there's many things there. The fuse board itself, in addition to that, you can also have the fuses. So you have the porcelain fuses. Typically inside them they can either have an asbestos textile flash guard within the fuse itself or a rolled asbestos paper flash guard. And then in addition to that, the carrier that the fuse goes into can also have another woven textile flash guard to it. And less commonly known one is the wiring itself. Has anybody seen the old wiring from kind of the 30s, the 40s, typically in the black conduit? Well, they tend to be wrapped in a woven chrysotile wrap. So hence the picture up in the top right-hand side, that is actually asbestos. If anybody wants to see this in real life, we have actually brought some live samples with us today as well, so you can actually see them close up but safely. Picture 6. Am I on the right one? Yep, good. So picture 6 again, weatherboard cladding, made out of insulation board. A little bit extra one on this picture is the dechromastic roof. Everybody aware that they contain asbestos? Well, lots of them do. Loose fill insulation under the floor. On that particular picture, that is raw chrysidolite that a plumber discovered while fitting some pipework. And the less common one is the picture of the office building. So on the outside of this building, under the windows, you've actually got, the metal infill panel. Well, on the other side of the infill panel is actually a layer of insulation board to keep the heat in the building, stop the cold coming in, and then it tends to be sandwiched between plasterboard or timber on the other side of it as well. And the final one could potentially be on this picture, galbestos. Does anybody know what galbestos is? Has anybody come across it before? Good, seen a couple of hands going up. So galbestos, it's a sheet of galvanised steel. It's coated in 100% pure chrysotile asbestos paper, and then is coated again in asbestos bitumen, again typically about 8% content. In its normal form, it's pretty good condition. It's pretty low chance of disturbing it, but once it starts to weather, it becomes highly friable very quickly. I hear commonly it's bitumen, it's non-friable. Always assume the worst case scenario. Because it's got paper, it will make it a friable material for removal. 7, we go into the plant room. The first 2 pictures on the left, top and bottom, is a Perkins boiler from 1977. Very common in New Zealand residential properties. There's nothing in the boiler itself until you get down to where the access panel is on the front for the electrics, and that is a millboard gasket actually wrapped around it. It's typically around 97% pure asbestos content, highly friable, very significant fibre release if you were to disturb this. The cylinders themselves can be lagged with what's the word I'm looking for? Just with asbestos, then covered in a hard outer layer such as Bulldog. You've got the thermal pipe insulation on the bottom middle picture, pretty typical site. But also the calcium magnesia sectional pipe insulation as well. This is common on a lot of commercial buildings in New Zealand that we survey. And pretty obvious one, the gasket. In that form, good condition, no risk. Once you pull that flange apart, it will become friable, it will become a risk to health. Fire doors commonly contain asbestos, either packed with loose fill or with an insulation board sandwich panel. Floor tiles, either vinyl, so pretty bendy, vinyl floor tiles up to 10% content. Thermoplastic in the bottom left corner, typically around 25% content. And again, behind heaters, you can find cement panels and insulation board panels. Bathrooms, commonplace, vinyl floor covering. The bottom one on the left, surprisingly, is post-2000. This vinyl floor covering with the chrysotile fibre hanging out of it was manufactured in 2010. Laminate insulation board, you find it behind a lot of showers. So you've either got a timber or a laminate plastic cover into it. Looks like plastic. If you stab into it with the knife or you break it, it does in fact contain insulation board. It's also used on things like bath panels as well behind them. Another one, vinyl floor covering, again, in a kitchen. A particular picture on the right is a clearance that I went on and promptly failed. So the black vinyl floor covering is modern. So when this survey had taken place, it was a refurbishment and demolition survey that we're going to talk about shortly. They hadn't looked under the kitchen cupboards. When the contractor went in to take the kitchen out, he actually found the asbestos vinyl underneath where the cupboards used to be. The acoustic bitumen sink pad, again, quite common in older properties. They can contain asbestos. And again, in a kitchen, when we did a demolition survey, behind the wall we found a cement panel where the old range cooker used to be. And there should be a handout on everybody's table now. So rather than going through every single thing that could potentially be in the building, we just picked 10 boxes off there. But there is a list of everything that you could commonly find in a building. So we're going to talk kind of very briefly now about asbestos surveys, the different types of survey, what they include, what you should actually be getting once you receive your report. So many people in this room are likely to come across asbestos surveys when they're working on buildings in some way, shape or form, whether they be management, refurbishment and demolition or just an analysis certificate. So the new regulations stipulate now that these are carried out, that asbestos in buildings is identified by competent persons, and that the findings are indicated to those people that may disturb the asbestos. So in effect, you need to know what they contain and how to interpret them. So the key survey aims, in effect, is to find the asbestos. So it's to locate and record the location, extent, product type of any known or presumed ACMs. So ACM, asbestos containing material. Look, the accessibility of it, the condition, the surface treatment, and to determine and record it either by sampling or presumption. You don't have to sample asbestos. However, if you don't, you must presume something to contain asbestos. We'll record all the information in the accessible areas. If there's any inaccessible areas during the survey, it will be presumed to contain asbestos, unless there's reasonable grounds to believe that it's not. Really, really important. If something hasn't been accessed, please do presume it's contain asbestos. You could walk in there, there could be damaged pipe insulation somewhere, and again, you're walking straight into an exposure. There's a couple of survey types, the management survey and the refurbishment and demolition survey. So the management survey is exactly that, it's to manage asbestos in premises during normal occupation and foreseeable maintenance activities. The refurb and demolition survey, which was previously type 3 survey, is, as the name suggests, for refurb and demolition. So we're not going to focus on management today, we're going to focus on refurbishment and demolition. Many surveys or many properties that we go to have only had a management survey and then further asbestos is found during the refurbishment or demolition. I must stress the refurbishment and demolition survey is exactly that. It is a fully destructive, fully intrusive survey type to find all the asbestos within the fabric of the building. It will damage decor, it will not be left in a nice and tidy state. Another key one is the property must be unoccupied. If you're going to do a refurbishment or demolition survey, it's no good if the occupants still live in the property, is it? You know, how can you actually go there and physically break into the building when somebody's living there? Causes too much mess. There is still a risk of exposure during the survey. You could go through something that is very well hidden, disturb it. So there's a risk to the surveyor undertaking it, hence we wear PPE and RPE, and there's significant risk to the occupants of the property as well. I was about to say, why can't they... Yeah, I've already asked the question now. Right, forget the last bit. So this is the reason why they can't be carried out in occupied premises. This was a survey I undertook last year. We'd insisted that the property was empty before we went in there, and we found this. So when we went behind the wall, we found the metal ducting. All well and good, it looks like metal. When we investigated further down to the bottom, you can see on the picture on the left, there used to be an asbestos cement flue went into this ducting where it goes to the chimney. And even worse, the inside of the metal flue is lined with millboard. If that property had been occupied, that would have been missed, and that would have been a much more expensive clean-up, and people would have been exposed to that. Remember, millboard is up to 97% pure asbestos mixed with clay and starch. Very, very friable. So intrusions, the kind of intrusions that would happen on this type of survey don't involve wandering around, tapping on the walls, sticking a little knife into it, and saying, yeah, we've done an intrusive inspection. Intrusions will go things like behind bath panels, into service risers, into walls. So there is actually the cement. You can just see where the pink bats is missing. There is actually a cement panel hidden behind there. Holes in ceilings, not the most tidy, but quite effective. Pull off windowsills. This windowsill here has insulation board packers where the windowsill used to be. It will involve ripping out door frames, things like that as well. It will involve breaking into fireplaces. Fireplaces are a common source of where to find asbestos, whether it be cement, insulation board, rope seals, cement flues, things like that. Windowsills, again, commonly contain packers or the bitumen vapour barrier within the fabric of the building. Behind the timber cladding, you can find cement and insulation board, and again, behind false stud walls, you can find things like asbestos toilets. So, after the intrusion, so you get your survey report, your surveyor's gone out, he's done your report, you'll get your survey report. They're meant to be easy for you to read, relatively straightforward, but they're meant to have all the information to help you safely manage the asbestos on site, both prior to removal and prior to demolition. So it should record the location, so where is the asbestos? No point saying there's asbestos there if we don't know where it is. The extent of the asbestos. I mean, before I go through this, how many people just receive a bulk analysis certificate when they've had an asbestos survey done? Then we'll just get a piece of paper saying, this contains chrysotile, this contains this contains this. Yep, right, that is no good for you whatsoever. You need a full survey report recording the location of it, the extent, how much asbestos is there. Is it 1 square metre, is it 100 square metres? The product type, you know, is it a friable or is it a non-friable material? The level of identification, was it presumed or was it sampled? The asbestos type inside the product, whether it's chrysotile, tremolite, actinolite, whichever. Recommendations of what to do with it. Now, recommendations on a demolition survey, pretty straightforward, remove it. On a management survey, all asbestos doesn't need to be removed, so depending on the condition of it, the surveyor will make an assessment, he will make a recommendation. Does it need painting, does it need encapsulating, or can you just safely manage it in situ? So the sample locations, they should be clearly marked on plans, and the laboratory results should be there along with what's been sampled, what isn't asbestos material. So even a room description, what the room is made out of, showing that it's non-asbestos and it has been investigated. So what you should be getting, these are some bits out of a survey report. So you should be having photographs of the asbestos material. How can you find it if there isn't a photograph of it? Should have an asbestos register, which is the picture in the bottom left corner, which will stipulate everything about that material that has been sampled. And more importantly, the picture on the bottom right is the plans with asbestos, positive asbestos, clearly defined in red. Everybody getting all these? Good. So reports and registers, you know, read the full report. I'm not going to talk through all of this. Asbestos registers are often out of date. You're looking for the most up-to-date information. Please read all the asbestos information. It's normally spread throughout the entire document. It will give you the full story of the asbestos in that premises. Don't just look at the pictures. And that's it. We're done.